I'm looking forward to sharing the acting scene with Cena, Rock, Roman. I'm coming for y'all. Y'all taking my roles, especially you, Cena. There was a commercial I auditioned for, and you stole that role. So, an attitude adjustment is coming your way.
Yeah. Yeah.
4 letters, one word, yeet. Welcome to the most overrated, underappreciated, most viewed, underviewed podcast of all time. Welcome to the Prince of Fresh Air. I am, of course, your host, the beloved, the most charismatic man in entertainment. Beat that, Dwayne The Rock Johnson. I'm coming back for you, Stone Cold Stunner style. Welcome back to another episode. It's been a couple weeks. I've been busy, getting the acting stuff together, getting guests on for the podcast. It takes a lot of work, but you know what? We're rocking, we're rolling. Summer was great. I had a great time, and I just want to provide good quality content. Whether you're stuck in bumper to bumper traffic, you're on your way home from work, you're going to pick up the kids, you're going to the bar to have a couple beers, you're going to catch a movie. I want you to sit back, relax, because this is the most entertaining podcast you will ever find. But why am I here today? What are we doing today? Who is my guest today? Well, my guest today is the most charismatic man, myself, because I will be going bold solo by myself today, addressing some of the hottest topics going on in sports and entertainment. And we're going to do this my way, the Prince of Fresh Air way. So let's get into this. The first thing I want to talk about, it's been a lot of things going on. And, especially, for a lot of people who may not know, I am a WWE fan. And so there's been a whole thing going on about a retirement tour. What retirement tour am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the You Can't See Me, John Cena. That's right, the greatest of all time, hanging up his gloves at the end of this year, December 2025. And there's been a lot of talks and remarks and opinions and thoughts about his latest run with WWE as he gets ready to hang up his wrestling boots for good. The reason why this conversation is coming up, because John Cena recently lost to Brock Lesnar at WrestlePalooza this September, and it got a lot of people fired up and frustrated. Why is John Cena going out the way he is? Why is he losing to Brock Lesnar? Why are the WWE not booking John Cena the way how he should be? So here's my thoughts. Let me break this down. John Cena was pushing 50 years old, same as Brock. No disrespect to those guys. They've done a lot of amazing work in terms of WWE and being outside of the wrestling ring as well. John Cena is a very selfless man. He's grateful for being the face of the company for over 20 years. And, for him, he knows how this business goes. And that's someone who's been a fan since, early high school, and, even went to wrestling school for a short period of time. I know the grind that it takes. I know the ethics and the codes that come with being a professional wrestler. And someone like a John Cena, who is a company man through and through, he looks at the business. His heel turn, we'll address that in a second, but he looks at the product as a business, and he looks at it as, passing the torch to the next generation. So before I get into the whole Brock Lesnar thing that just recently happened, let's talk about this heel turn. The heel turn everybody's been waiting for the last 10 years. Was it underwhelming to you? Well, here's the thing. With John Cena being a heel, I think it could have been done better. If I'm being honest, it could have been done better. But I think John Cena didn't want to truly turn into a Randy Orton type of heel. One, because he knows that his fan base is kids. He does a lot of Make-A-Wish foundations for kids. A lot of kids love him. I love him. Other adults older than me love him. But he knows that his target audience is family friendly. And for him, doing a heel turn doesn't necessarily mean he has to go over doing a Stone Cold Stunner, drinking beer, flipping the middle finger in the camera, cursing out, beating up women, hypothetically in wrestling terms, not in that way. Um, there was a way for him to do the heel turn without having to cross that boundary. And especially being a public figure in Hollywood, he probably wanted to keep his brand on point while also showing a little edge. If you've seen Peacemaker, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, the heel turn, I think, a lot of things went wrong with it. Not John Cena's fault. I think the whole Rock and Travis Scott angle that they had, um, and some of the other things that happened behind the scenes with all of that. I think it could have been done better. And I think his booking this year has been interesting to say the least. I'm super glad that they gave him the championship to break Ric Flair's record, to make him the longest reigning or the most successful champion in WWE history is something that he definitely deserved on his way out. And I think at this point, people got to realize John Cena, he loves his business. He loves himself. I'm sure his success he cares a lot about, but he also cares about handing the torch and passing the torch over to the next. It's a tried and true era, tried and true theme in wrestling. When you're on your way out, you put people over. The Undertaker had to do it. The Rock had to do it. Stone Cold had to do it. They all had to do. All the big names had to pass the torch because the sport needs the people that help build it raise up the next generation and let them take the reins. That's why Roman Reigns is killing it right now. Shout out to the tribal chief, even though he needs to acknowledge me. I'm saying that Paul Heyman. But on a serious note, though, I think John Cena's booking has been a point of contention for fans. But they got to look at it from this way too. John Cena doesn't want to go out winning every match. Why? We've seen that angle before where people complain, big match John, corporate John always winning, burying talent, the whole Wade Barrett angle that happened 10 years ago. I think John Cena knows that, being that this is his retirement tour, give the people and the fans what they want. They want to see John Cena for the last time in their city. And so he doesn't necessarily need to win every match, especially on his way out. It's not like it's a big secret. Everybody knows he's on his way out. So, I think with him losing to Brock, I've read the reports. I read the dirt sheets. I know John Cena was supposed to win, but he changed, the day of WrestlePalooza. He went in and told Triple H, no, have Brock win. And people might say, wait, Brock? Brock ain't no young up and coming talent. Why is John putting over Brock? Well, you gotta understand, John Cena's retiring. Brock isn't. Brock is going to be used to put over somebody else. So, John is giving the rub to Brock, even though he doesn't really need it. Brock or John Cena don't need to be passing each other rub. No Diddy, but I think that Brock has a purpose. And, Brock is one of the greatest to ever do it himself, doesn't get enough credit. But I think that, with Cena, only having 6 days left, 6 dates left, I should say, his time is limited. His time is coming up and he knows that he's approaching the near end. And let's just give back to the business that gave him not only incredible fans, but a lifelong career, a lot of money, a lot of name value. They made him a household name. He went from sleeping in his car to being the face of one of the greatest sports entertainment promotions of all time. And so for him, he's selfish in his journey, and he knows that he's always going to be John Cena when he retires. He's always going to have the fan base. He's always going to have the name recognition, the power, the love, the legend status. It's already cemented. So for him at this point, let's use this time to, train and give somebody else the opportunity to step up. Now that Roman is doing his thing, he's killing it. But let's raise somebody else up, who's a little bit younger, who can carry the generation, next to that they're in, and maybe raise up the next generation after them. And so, I say this to all say, yes, John Cena deserves to win some of the big matches that he's been losing. But you know what? We had a heel turn for the fans. He got to win his WWE championship, making him the 17-time world record holder, in WWE history. and he's also going out and he's promoting and showing, that, even though on his way out he can still go, and he's using his time to not be greedy, not be selfish, walk down that ramp, pin every opponent that comes in there, and walk off to the sunset with his hand raised. He's doing what every legend did for him. They went out, stand up at the lights, putting somebody else over and let somebody else carry the torch as they, move on to the next chapter of their lives. So, John Cena's the greatest to ever do it, and his career is to be lauded, applauded, celebrated. But you know what? He deserves, at least one more win. At least let him win one more WWE. Come on, Triple H. Give Cena something. We don't want him losing every match going forward, but at least give him something, maybe over another legend, another icon, in the company, and then maybe, in December and his grand finale, I should say, he can use that time to give somebody the rub, stir up at the lights, as tradition say, and he'll still have a blossoming career in Hollywood going forward. And I'm looking forward to sharing the acting scene with Cena, Rock, Roman. I'm coming for y'all. Y'all taking my roles, especially you, Cena. There was a commercial I auditioned for, and you stole that role. So, an attitude adjustment is coming your way. But as we move on, we hit the WWE stuff. Let's transition over to something a little more fun for the MMA fans. So the White House card is coming up next year, 2026 June. Donald Trump and Dana White has announced that they will be doing a UFC pay-per-view at the White House. One of the greatest events in combat sports history that you can put on. A lot of fighters are chomping at the bit to be there. A lot of people want to be involved, to be at the White House doing a sporting event. Nobody has ever been able to do that. So now to see that come to fruition as an American and as a sports fan, it's a dream come true. And I think, for me, there's a reason behind why I brought this up, because when you have a card this big, especially as an American, you got two names that come to mind. One for Americans, Jon Jones. I've talked about him half length. Yeah, I know he is the greatest of all time. Jon Jones and Conor McGregor, one of the greatest money makers in the sports history. Well, if he is the greatest, outside of Ronda Rousey. Those two are chomping at the bit. And I've spoken this at length. I did a whole episode. Go check it out, where I defended Jon Jones and his decision to not defy Tom Aspinall for the UFC heavyweight strap. But now it's coming to bite him a little bit. And I say that, you know, sarcastically, because Dana White is going on and said, I don't really need Jon Jones. I don't trust Jon Jones. I'd rather give the spot to Conor McGregor. Now, this is no disrespect to the fans, but if y'all believe that Dana White is going to have one of the greatest pay-per-views to ever grace our screens and our eyeballs at the White House, our national capital, and not put the greatest American combat sports athlete not on that card, you're sadly mistaken. And the debate is who would be the main event if Jon Jones and Conor um, competes there. I got a simple reason and explanation for all this. I got a simple answer for you. Jon Jones will headline. Why? Now, people might say, well, Conor's the biggest star in the sport. Yeah, you're right. Maybe 3 years ago. And look, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Conor. I love Conor McGregor, one of the greatest showmen, until I came along. I think I'm the greatest showman now, but I'll give him his props and say he is the biggest star the UFC has ever produced. The problem with Conor, and I'm not going to talk about his legal issues. Same with John. It's been documented, but this is not an argument about who's a greater, religious person here. We're talking about combat sports. Um, Connor's coming off an injury to Dustin Poirier in their third trilogy fight. Well, in their trilogy fight, and he hasn't fought in 4 or 5 years. Coming off a major leg injury, he pulled out last year over an injured toe. I'm not going to make fun of him over that. As someone who trains, I know it's not that easy to just be hopping, all over the place and still, sticking with dates, especially when you're at that level. Connor, for as beloved as he is, I do think that at 36 years old, having fought since he was 31, 32, the stars dwindling a little bit. And I'm not being disrespectful at all. I love Connor. There's no shade to him at all. But I think as fans and for the media, Connor will always get some sort of clicks. But I don't know if the hype is there for him anymore. And I'm not saying that because he's a lesser athlete. It's been so many years, time has gone on. And when you have a Alex Pereira, you have a Tom Aspinall, you have a Hamza Shemaya, if you have a Ilya Taporia, the list goes on of great, superstar, athletes in the making. Um, you don't really need to rely on him, especially at the White House. And so for me, I look at it as, you know, it's the equivalent to Ireland throwing a pay per view at their national capital and not putting Conor McGregor on the pay per view. It makes no sense. And so for me, I think, despite what people say about John Duncan Tom and all this nonsense, whether you like him or hate him, Jon Jones is the greatest to ever do it. Despite people want to cherry picking his resume and calling him all types of flagrant stuff, I'm going to stand behind this. And it's not just because I'm a fan of Jon Jones and I respect the athlete of Jon Jones, but I also respect the history of the sport. And I think a lot of fans have lost that. I think a lot of fans are very disrespectful to fighters. They lose one time or they do something they don't like. They pull out of a fight. They're trash. They're fraud checked. They're useless. They need to go to a smaller promotion. They're washed up. All of this garbage. Now, for me, Jon Jones, greatest to ever do it. He wants to end his career on a high note at the White House. He didn't get to do it against Stipe Madison Square Garden MSG in 2024 when he successfully defended the belt. Love Stipe. But I think he wants to go out at the top. I think he wants to have that grand finale that most athletes get at that level, a nice acknowledgement for his career. And I think Dana White is, he's probably a little mad that Jon Jones didn't take the fight. But like I said, I've been over at length. I'm not going to make God listen to this whole spiel all over again. I would just say Dana is probably, he feels a little snubbed, but he'll get over it. The White House card is not for another almost 10 months. He'll put Jon Jones as the main event as long as Jon Jones is healthy and can compete. It's going to be Jon Jones' main event. There's nobody in America and an American in the UFC right now bigger than Jon Jones, and they're not going to give it to Conor because it's a White House pay-per-view for Americans. And this is not a nationality or citizen debate here. This is more of a pure sport fan, a pure sports idea and vision. You have the NBA championships. Well, I can't really use that example, but as a combat sport, you need to put the biggest star to ever grace the octagon. Jon Jones deserves the main event. He will most likely get the main event. And for all the people saying he's ducking Tom Aspinall, don't be surprised if he actually fights Tom Aspinall at the White House. So it's a win-win for all of us, especially for me, because Jon Jones, I'm still getting that interview. Yeah, you're not going to be ducking me. All right, watch yourself. But as we're talking about sports, WWE, UFC, we're talking about a lot of stuff, and so far, one of the things I have been, talking, I've been hearing and talking to, fellow guests about, MMA journalist James Lynch, Kevin Iole, Damian DeBell, Power Slap heavyweight champion. You know, I wonder if sports is becoming supremely expensive for fans. And this actually ties into the whole UFC new move where, for people who don't know, they just signed the $7.7 billion deal with Paramount Plus for over 7 years to stream UFC content over there. And they're not doing pay per views anymore. They're done. They're finished. That's it. Is this the new normal? Is this the new era of sports? Not having to pay for pay per views, the expense of having to pay for a network subscription, and then also having to pay $80 a month for the big fight of the month. Is that truly gone, or is this just a momentum thing right now? This is just in the moment, money's looking good right now, and so we're not really hard pressed for cash as we used to be. I do think getting rid of the pay per view model is the best thing. Now, I'll be honest with you, I haven't paid for a pay per view ever. I can't give away my sources. But I watched them. Trust me, I watched them. But let me shut up because I know the FBI watching. Um, I think that the pay per view model should have been extinct, 5, 10 years ago. I think that we're at a time now with ESPN, Netflix, Amazon, Paramount, all of these big companies have the budgets and the money to put on, shows, and we're seeing it now with WWE now on ESPN and Netflix. The production value is crisp, it's clear, it looks so much better, and it also can tap into new markets. And so I think for the UFC, I think it's a smart move because, let's be honest, a lot of people don't like combat sports. I wouldn't say a lot, but a good majority of people think it's barbaric. They think it's bloody, it's nasty, it's hardcore sports. But it's actually a true sport. It's when we're not talking about gladiator days where people was getting beheaded. We're talking about athletes that train very hard. They go out there very conditioned, very trained, and they're disciplined, whether it's wrestling, kickboxing, Muay Thai, whatever the case may be is. And they show their skills out against the others, against other best in the world athletes. And I think this will be a new way for the UFC to kind of, expand into new markets and tap into new fans because let's be real. Like I said, it's expensive to be a sports fan nowadays. You need multiple subscriptions to watch different sports. Fortunately, unless you only like one or two sports, you might be able to keep those costs low. But with the arena, the price of tickets for sporting events, coupled with having subscriptions and maybe having to pay for pay per views, boxing, I think I don't know if it's too expensive as a fan, unless you really just want to go to the attend pay per views. Then it can get a little costly. Ticket sales has been skyrocketing. Let's be honest with that. People blaming TKO, the group that owns WWE and UFC now. They're blaming them for coming in and kind of monopolizing the market. But we're living in a time now where eggs are $12 for a dozen. Everybody's trying to make a lick off the hardworking people. So, including me, for me, it is getting a little expensive, but I think we're getting to a point where we're going to see a lot of we're going to be seeing some of these companies kind of start bridging the gap a little bit, where you're going to see maybe a Netflix housing NBA, NFL, and maybe UFC at some point. And so now all you need is a Netflix subscription. You can watch all the pay per views, all the fights for that small fee that you'll pay, and eventually it'll get to that point. So right now, it's a little expensive. It's a little heavy on the wallet, but you know what? It's at the end of the day, if you know where to look, not. Let me not say that. Let me. People watching. I'm sorry, but I do think that uh, the criticism is fair. WWE's move to Netflix and ESPN, people complaining about the increase of costs and subscriptions, but with every business as they grow and they get more lucrative, and the eyeballs is just on the product, you're going to demand it's a tried and true era. All corporations, all businesses do that. Call it corporate greed, but it's I'm not shocked. At the end of the day, WWE is here to make a profit. TKO Group is here to make a profit. So, it's not shocking. But again, it's reasonable. It's not like they're asking for $50 a month and you only get small content. You're getting exclusive content, for that price without having to pay for pay-per-views. So, I think we're in a little bit of rough spot with sports, but I think we're going to be out of that in a couple years. I think we're going to see a big shift in sports coverage for fans, and the access to these type of content will start to it'll become easier for us to kind of digest and pay for. But sporting tickets, I don't know about all that. I love UFC, but $800 to sit in the bleachers looking up at the cameraman. I don't know if I'll be doing that. But you know what? To each their own. Some people like the live experience well enough. They'll save enough for all of that. And you know, I hope ticket sales, ticket prices, I should say, go down. But we all know once it goes up, it ain't coming down. It's only going to go up and up and up. So just enjoy it while it lasts. Try to, if you want to see a sporting event, try to save up a little bit and maybe just save for the dream matchup you want to see. So I've been talking a lot about WWE and all this stuff, expenses and all that stuff. But one of the things I wanted to address is the Jimmy Kimmel thing. When I first started this podcast, I was doing content like this where I would talk about the hard hitting things. And over the years, as my career as an actor started picking up, the podcast started growing. I stopped talking about the heavy content, right? I stopped talking about the hot takes that get people riled up. And the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing, I was hesitant to talk about, but I think you know maybe my opinion would be so would suffice because I think I'm a voice of the people and I come from a very interesting perspective. I don't have a fight in this, and I'm just an outlook and looking in, right? So Jimmy Kimmel. For people who don't know, Jimmy Kimmel was briefly suspended by ABC over his comments about Charlie Kirk. Rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. That's a whole nother controversy, but at the end of the day, nobody deserves to get gunned down like that, especially in front of their kids. It's whether you like a person, you hate them. It's that's not that's not a time to celebrate. You can, if you don't care for him, that's your opinion, that's your right. But as just as a human being, seeing that, you know, at the end of the day, it's hard to say. It's hard to see, and when you have suffered loss, it makes you appreciative and more kind to people who suffer those type of tragedies. So my thoughts and prayers go out to Charlie Kirk. His family, I should say. Rest in peace to Charlie Kirk. Didn't deserve to go out like that. But Jimmy Kimmel gets suspended over his comments. About that the shooter. A young college student. And he gets canceled. People go into uproar. People are threatening to cancel Disney subscriptions. They're going to boycott it. A lot of different media markets, different content creators are up in arms about this. Free speech is being censored. And we all know who's to blame. Just say the president. People are blaming him for all this chaos going on. But here's my thoughts about this. Jimmy Kimmel, I've watched his show a handful of times. I do like his product. I do like him as a host. I walk past the Jimmy Kimmel studio in New York City all the time, and he does a good show. I will give him credit for that. I think for me, did he deserve to get suspended? No, but I'm not shocked either, and I'll tell you why. I think we're at a point with politics, and this is why I don't address it on the show anymore. I've done a lot of episodes on politics and especially with the presidents. And it seems to me I haven't received a lot of backlash for it, but I have noticed some of the comments. I have noticed that some episodes aren't being able to be accessed on certain platforms because of the content. And even though I'm coming from a fair place, I'm not picking a side. It gets flagged. So we're at a place. Politics is a very sensitive thing in our country. It's unfortunate that it got to this point, but this society we live in. So I could complain all night, and make y'all fall asleep, but I'm not going to do that. I think with Jimmy Kimmel, I think for him now that he's back on air, even though a lot of stations are going to refuse to air his product, his show, I think he needs to take a different approach to it. Meaning, everybody's divisive when it comes to politics. Whether you like Trump, you hate Trump, you're Republican, you're Democrat, you're far right, you're far left. there's a big, clear tension between the two parties with different people all in between the spectrum. And I think for him, I've watched the show enough to see that he has his political beliefs. I'm not here to question it. And he has every right to feel the way he does. But I think when you're hosting a late night show, I think you have to be cautious of the era we live in now. And I got the pleasure to see Johnny Carson. I went to a museum in Manhattan not too long ago this summer, and I wasn't alive during his show, but I got to see a couple episodes at the museum, and his show was phenomenal. No politics involved, nobody's opinions involved, nobody's political beliefs thrown on anybody else. And I think that's what Jimmy Kimmel needs to do. I think his approach to his show has been good, but I think he has allowed sometimes his political opinions to seep into conversations with guests. And, some people might say I'm wrong to say that, but I've seen interviews, with countless celebrities, who are there to promote something. They're there to promote a movie, a book, a project, a new album, whatever the case may be. They're not there to make political points. They're not there to pander to a certain group. They're just there to make money, sell their product, be on a national platform like that, and continue about their day. And I think when you start allowing your opinions and your thoughts to kind of seep into your program, I think it does turn people off, even if it's coming from a true place of kindness and respect. Like I said, we're in a politically charged environment today, climate, and a lot of people just don't want to enjoy. They want to dissociate themselves from content like that. And like I said, I don't think Jimmy Kimmel's a bad guy, but I think that as a viewer, I'm tired of everything being political. I'm tired of watching the show and they're making their political beliefs known. This show is showing that this side is terrible and this side is right. This it's too much. And I think a lot of us are starting to get fed up by it. Biased journalism, biased media. For me, I just think everything is designed to keep us distracted, keep us torn apart. Politics should not have made us so politically charged that unfortunately Charlie Kirk had to lose his life. And like I said, I'm not here to debate his opinions and views and stuff like that. I'm just here to say, Jimmy Kimmel, just approach the show differently. I think we're in the time now, unless you're doing specifically politically, driven content, when you allow your rhetoric and your opinions to seep into your product, it can turn off a certain customer base off. And a lot of these corporations, they don't want to take, they don't want to have to put their business model on the line to stand up for somebody. Disney don't they respect Jimmy Kimmel, but they care more about their bottom line. They care more about their family friendly image. And they know that, their customer base is probably going to be split. But let's just not involve politics in our corporation at all. This is stuff I'm sure they talk about behind the scenes, but we don't want our front facing on camera personalities, our product, to have any sort of political message because they know it's going to alienate a certain base. And depending who you upset, is going to spark a viral debate about this. So a lot of companies are taking an approach of, I don't see nothing, I don't know nothing. I'm just here to provide quality entertainment, and you should do the same. And I think Jimmy Kimmel just, like I said, he has made his opinions and his viewpoints known. And I think in the society we're in now, it's hard to do. And even though you might be pandering to a certain group, it's still dangerous. And especially with the timing of Charlie Kirk's death, like I said, whether you like him or hate him, you know, any comment that can be viewed as you're trying to, you're speaking ill will of the dead, you're disrespecting him, you're making fun of his children, his wife, his family. That doesn't sit well with a lot of people, and especially with a family friendly company like Disney. Um, they're not going to want to stand and take the brunt of the force of that because they know that affects their bottom line. They're going to have to go to investors and talk about that. So, you know, and let's be clear too, with the people trying to boycott Disney, let me tell you something. Disney World gets flooded every year by damn near 50 million people. If 10 people want to stop their subscription, Disney will be fine. They've survived this long, raising ticket prices for their amusement park for so long. People still go in credit card debt, right? Disney, yeah, they care about their bottom line, but they know they're always going to have their customer base. But they just don't want to have their name attached to certain things. So, I'm not here to say that people who want to stand up for Jimmy and freedom of speech, you're wrong. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying a company like Disney, there's always somebody else who will be willing to spend that $20 to say they have a Disney subscription. But in terms of freedom of speech, though, it is a big thing going on in our society. A lot of people have complaints about freedom of speech and how it's not really free in today's climate. As someone who's been doing this podcast for 5 years, been able to interview some amazing people, some very professional, highly successful people, I've learned over the years that I have to be careful on the content I produce because there's always that one person that gets upset and they call my agent or my manager and says, "Hey, Percy's saying this on his show. You need to check this out." It's happened before. And that's why, for me, I take the stance of I'm not going to be addressing certain things anymore because I've seen the negative downside to it. And, it's not because I'm afraid of controversy at all, but I just know that in my profession, especially when it comes to politics, is a very, very, you got to be careful on how you toe that line. So, going forward, I think freedom of speech is something I've talked about at length in the last couple years. I've done many episodes addressing it, whether it's comedians, whether it's just normal people talking and, you know, having freedom of expression. I think that freedom of speech is definitely being attacked. And it's not just one specific group doing it. I think just in general, with all of this politically charged climate that we're in, a lot of people feel like, especially with social media, that they can try to cancel you for everything, and it's just, I'm I love this era. I love social media and everything, but I also think there is a downside to it. I think freedom of speech is not freedom of consequences. People should be allowed to say whatever they want. Now, if you get fired, if you get caught, if you have to suffer some consequences for your actions, that's all well within the law. But I think people should be allowed to speak their truth. But just remember, Jimmy Kimmel is, yes, freedom of speech was a big thing, but freedom of consequences is not part of freedom of speech. So, he said what he said, and it wasn't the most egregious thing in the world. But again, you're working for a company that don't want to be involved and stuff like that. So, you got to be careful on how you talk, especially when you're on somebody else's dime. So, with all that being said, freedom of speech, I'm the most charismatic man. I say whatever I want to say, and you better acknowledge me. Even though Roman Reigns, you need to throw those ones up, to iron me. But this has been a great episode. I just wanted to provide some content for you guys because, you know, I love doing this show. I love, interviewing people. And, I've said this before. I think, at times people are busy. I'm looking forward to getting some really good guests. I have some good guests lined up for the show. And sometimes, life happens. I'm a busy man. Tom Cruise just called me. Mission Impossible number 10, I'll be a part of. And then Vin Diesel too. I gotta reach out to him because I've been waiting for a part in Fast and Furious for a few years. I didn't get the script. Jason Momoa, we're right here. Where my script at, Vin Diesel? Come on, Ludacris. Where's my script? I'm trying to race some drift cars too. But all seriousness though, um, James Gunn, I called you out last episode. And I mean when I say I want a role in DC or Marvel. I'll take either or. I could be a villain, I could be a hero, I could be both. I'm just that man. I'm that dude. I'm here to replace the old heads in the industry. Dwayne The Rock Johnson, I'm coming for you. Nah, I always respected him. I know always call him out, but always respected him. Smash Machine, can't wait to see that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Doing solo episodes is different. It's interesting. But you know what? I'm getting used to it. It's fun. And it gives y'all something to enjoy too. So, please go over to the YouTube channel. Like I said, this is not just a podcast anymore. It's still a podcast, but it's more of a show now. I'm the showman. I'm the greatest showman to ever grace your microphones, your speakers, your screens, your eyeballs. You're not going to get another duplicate of the most charismatic man. So enjoy it while it lasts, baby. But all seriousness, if you love the show, please, Spotify, all the full videos go on Spotify, YouTube channel. I finally started, having this podcast, you know, on YouTube. So go over there, follow, rate the show, leave comments. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's certain topics you want me to address, because in between guests, I want to still have a show going on for you guys. I don't want to have to keep waiting every month or so to drop an episode. So if I got to come on here and serenade you, even though I'm sounding like Michael Jackson, I'm getting there. I'm taking vocal lessons. But I want to provide content for you guys because a lot of you have been here since day one. And even if you just joined, I thank you because, you could be watching something else and you took the time to tune in and watch me. And I'm very grateful. And before I go, I also want to give a quick shout out to St. Bonaventure, my alma mater. They did a nice social media piece, giving me honors about an article that I just did with Bold Journey. Go check that out. Life lessons and legacy. That's the name of it. It's just dropped. It's all on my social medias. You'll find it. Hit Google. Percy Brown actor. Search up Bold Journey. You'll find it. And it was nice to see the respect and be recognized for all the hard work I do because people they see me and they think I have life on easy mode. And truth be told, it's a little bit easy, but I'm hardworking out here too. I don't think I'm above anybody else. Another content creator, another actor, one of you listeners, there's people who are working just as hard, if not harder than me. And I'm just trying to stake my name in the history books if I could. And just leave my mark and hopefully just continue entertaining and providing quality content for you guys. So like I said, check out the podcast, YouTube. I'm really trying to grow that channel out. I got some big things coming up too, not just guests, but you'll be surprised. I'm in the works about something specific. Maybe some details will drop soon, but I'll let you know. Thank you for tuning in to the most charismatic experience. And like I always say, a helping hand is a better hand. Roman Reigns, acknowledge the tribal chief. I'm out.